Most people are taught that animals are either pets or factory products, but that's not how our ancestors survived. For thousands of years, certain animals quietly provided food, income, labor, and security with very little land, feed, or cost. That knowledge wasn't lost because it stopped working. It was buried when modern systems took over. In this video, I'm uncovering one forgotten bird that outperformed chickens in nearly every way, yet disappeared from 90% of American farms in just 50 years. It wasn't because it failed. It was because it didn't fit the industrial model. If you believe animals are more than pets, this channel is for you. I share forgotten animal systems like this every week, and subscribing means you won't miss the knowledge most people never learn. Welcome to the Animal Lost Vault. Let's unlock it. The animal I'm talking about is the guinea fowl, and before the 1970s, it was considered essential on productive family farms across rural America. Not as a hobby bird, not as decoration, as a self-sufficient security system that also happened to produce healthy protein without constant investment. This bird matters because it solved a quiet survival problem most people don't even realize they have. Pest control without chemicals, protein production without expensive feed bills, property security without technology. And it did all three simultaneously every single day without human intervention. Our ancestors understood this. Modern systems trained us to ignore it. What makes this particularly relevant today is that families are rediscovering the cost of dependence. Grocery store eggs that once cost $2 now cost $6 or $7. Pesticides that promised convenience now come with health warnings. Security systems that require monthly subscriptions and electricity. Guinea fowl offered an alternative that required none of these inputs. They worked because they were designed by nature to survive, not by corporations to maximize profit. In traditional American homesteads from the 1920s through the 1960s, guinea fowl weren't considered exotic. They were standard. You'd find them on farms from Georgia to Ohio, from Texas to the Carolinas. Families didn't raise them for fun. They raised them because these birds solved real problems that affected daily life and long-term sustainability. Tick infestations that threatened livestock, grasshopper swarms that destroyed gardens, snakes that endangered children and small animals. Guineas handled all of it without chemicals, without labor, without cost. And unlike chickens, they did it while staying alert, loud, and protective. The alarm call of a guinea fowl can be heard from half a mile away, when a hawk circled overhead, when a fox approached at dusk, when a stranger walked onto the property. The guineas sounded the alarm. That warning protected not just the flock, but the chickens, the goats, the garden, and the family. It was a life-changing layer of security that didn't require batteries or a monthly fee. But perhaps most importantly, guinea fowl represented something deeper: independence. The ability to produce your own food, protect your own land, and reduce reliance on outside systems. In an era when self-sufficient living wasn't a trend but a necessity, guineas were one of the most practical investments a family could make. That's why this bird matters. Not because it's rare or romantic, but because it solved everyday survival problems with elegance and efficiency, and it still can. Why this system actually worked. The reason guinea fowl worked on traditional American farms wasn't luck or nostalgia. It worked because it matched real life. Unpredictable weather, limited budgets, predator pressure, the need for animals that could take care of themselves without supervision. Unlike chickens, which were bred over centuries to be docile and dependent, guinea fowl retained their wild instincts. This made them harder to control, but it also made them incredibly resilient. They didn't need predator-proof co-ops with hardware cloth and automatic doors. They roosted in trees at night, 15 to 20 feet off the ground, where foxes, raccoons, and coyotes couldn't reach them. They didn't need medicated feed or antibiotics to stay healthy. Their immune systems were robust, their foraging instincts sharp. While chickens succumbed to coccidiosis, mites, and respiratory infections, guineas simply didn't get sick. Veterinary bills for guinea flocks were practically non-existent. They didn't need expensive commercial feed. A chicken requires about a quarter pound of feed per day to maintain egg production. Guineas, by contrast, foraged up to 90% of their diet from the land. Ticks, beetles, grasshoppers, seeds, and grubs. If your land had insects and native grasses, your feed costs dropped to nearly nothing. This was especially valuable during the Great Depression and the post-war years when every dollar mattered. Families couldn't afford to buy 50-pound bags of feed every week. They needed animals that fed themselves. Guineas delivered. What made the system even more sustainable was their natural behavior patterns. Guineas are flock birds. Once they imprint on a location, they stay. You didn't need fences to contain them. You didn't need to herd them back at night. They returned to the same roosting trees every evening like clockwork. This freed up time and labor for other farm tasks. In an era before automation, time was as valuable as money. An animal that required 10 minutes of attention per day instead of 2 hours was a serious productivity advantage. Their pest control abilities weren't exaggerated. A small flock of 6 to 8 guineas could clear ticks from several acres of pasture. Farmers who raised cattle and horses knew that tick-borne illnesses cost more than the guineas ever would. Chickens scratch the soil and eat some insects, but they don't patrol. Guineas actively hunt. They walk the fence lines, the pasture edges, the garden borders. They're relentless. And because they consume thousands of ticks, beetles, and grasshoppers each week, they reduce the need for chemical sprays that harm soil health and beneficial insects. The system worked because it was regenerative. The birds improved the land while feeding themselves. They fertilized the soil, controlled pests, and alerted the family to danger. There was no waste, no dependency, no hidden costs. This is why families who raised guineas in the 1940s and 50s often kept them for decades. The birds outlived chickens, outworked chickens, and required a fraction of the input. It wasn't romantic, it was practical. And it's why the system sustained itself across generations until industrial agriculture decided it wasn't profitable enough to scale. Raising guinea fowl in traditional American homesteads wasn't complicated. There were no special certifications, no extension courses, no expensive infrastructure. Families followed a simple 3-step system that worked because it aligned with the bird's natural behavior. Here's exactly how it was done. Step 1. What they had. Historically, all they needed was open range and a few mature trees. No barns, no climate-controlled housing, no electric fencing, just space to roam during the day and sturdy branches to roost at night. Most farms had oak, pine, or maple trees near the house. That was enough. The trees provided safety from ground predators and shelter from rain. Guineas naturally prefer to sleep high. In their native African habitat, they roosted in acacia trees to avoid lions and hyenas. On American farms, the instinct remained. Farmers didn't need to train them. The birds simply flew up at dusk and stayed there until dawn. The only other requirement was access to water, a trough, a creek, or a pond. Guineas are hardy, but they need fresh water daily, especially in summer. Beyond that, the setup was minimal. No heated coops, no bedding to replace, no daily cleaning. The system required almost no maintenance because the birds lived outdoors year-round, even through winter. Their feathers are dense and insulating. As long as they had a windbreak and a high roost, they survived temperatures well below freezing. Step 2. What they did. The practice was simple. Release them at dawn, let them patrol the land, and they'd return at dusk. Farmers didn't hunt for them. They didn't chase them down for eggs. The birds naturally stayed near the homestead because that's where food scraps and water were. Every morning, the flock would fly down from the trees and begin their patrol. They moved as a unit, calling to each other, covering the property in wide, sweeping patterns. They'd work the garden edges first, eating beetles and caterpillars. Then they'd move to the pasture, hunting ticks off the grass. By midday, they'd rest in the shade, dust bathing and preening. By late afternoon, they'd circle back toward the barn or the house. As the sun set, they'd return to the same trees and roost for the night. Farmers didn't manage this behavior. It was automatic. The only human involvement was occasional feeding during winter when insects were scarce. A scoop of cracked corn or wheat in the evening kept them bonded to the property. Some families also provided a small shelter near the roost trees, not for the birds to sleep in, but as a windbreak during storms. Guineas rarely used it, but it was there if needed. That was the extent of daily labor. 10 minutes in the morning to check water, 5 minutes in the evening to toss scratch grain. The birds did everything else. Step 3. Why it sustained. To maintain it, they focused on one thing: let the birds follow their natural rhythm. Guineas are flock animals. Once they bond to a place, they stay. That alone kept the system alive for decades on the same land. Families didn't try to force them into nest boxes. They didn't try to increase egg production with artificial lighting. They didn't try to fence them in. They simply let the birds behave like guineas. And because the system didn't fight nature, it lasted. Hens would lay eggs in hidden nests during spring and summer. Most families collected some for eating, but they'd leave a few to hatch naturally. A broody guinea hen would raise her own keets without human help. By fall, the flock would grow by 6 to 10 birds. Some were kept, some were eaten, some were traded with neighbors. It was a closed-loop system. No hatchery orders, no incubators, no brooders. The birds reproduced themselves and the cycle continued. This is how guinea fowl were raised for generations. Not with technology, but with observation and respect for natural behavior. And it's why the system required so little and delivered so much. Over time, guinea fowl didn't just provide pest control and property security. They created a layer of stability that extended across multiple areas of homestead life: reliable protein, financial savings, health security. These weren't abstract benefits, they were measurable advantages that families noticed year after year. Let's start with nutrition. Guinea eggs are smaller than chicken eggs, but they're nutritionally superior in several ways. The yolk-to-white ratio is higher, meaning more healthy fats per egg. The yolk itself is a deep orange, almost red, indicating elevated levels of carotenoids and fat-soluble vitamins. In traditional communities, these eggs were often reserved for children, pregnant women, and the elderly because they were considered more nourishing. You didn't need to eat as many to feel satisfied. 2 guinea eggs provided the same richness as 3 chicken eggs. This mattered during lean times when food had to stretch. The meat was similarly valuable. Guinea fowl meat is darker than chicken, leaner, and higher in protein. It tastes closer to wild game, which makes sense because guineas remain semi-wild in behavior. In the 1940s and 50s, families would process older birds for Sunday dinners or holiday meals. The meat was prized for its flavor and its density. 1 guinea could feed a family of 4. And because the birds lived on foraged insects and seeds, the meat was clean. No antibiotics, no growth hormones, just pure, pasture-raised protein. Then there's the financial payoff. A family that raised guineas significantly reduced 3 major expenses: feed costs, because the birds foraged; pest control costs, because the birds eliminated ticks and garden insects; veterinary costs, because the birds rarely got sick. Over the course of a year, these savings added up to hundreds of dollars, which in mid-century terms represented serious money. Some families even generated income from guinea eggs and chicks, selling them to neighbors or at local markets. But perhaps the most valuable return was peace of mind. Guineas provided an early warning system that no technology could match. Their alarm call is unmistakable: high-pitched, repetitive, and loud. When that sound erupted, families knew something was wrong. A predator near the chicken coop, a car pulling into the driveway, a snake in the woodpile. That instant awareness protected livestock, prevented losses, and gave families time to respond. In rural areas where homes were isolated and help was miles away, that warning system was life-changing. Children playing outside were safer, livestock were more secure, and families slept better knowing the guineas were on watch. The birds also improved the land itself. As they foraged, they fertilized the soil with nitrogen-rich droppings. As they scratched and pecked, they aerated the ground and spread seeds. Pastures where guineas ranged were healthier and more biodiverse than pastures without them. This wasn't a short-term extraction. It was a regenerative system that built fertility and resilience over time. All of this added up to something deeper than convenience. It was self-sufficiency, the ability to produce food, maintain health, and protect your property without relying on outside systems or corporate products. And in an era when independence wasn't a luxury but a necessity, guinea fowl were one of the most sustainable and productive investments a family could make. So if guinea fowl were this productive, resilient, and low maintenance, why did they disappear from American farms? It wasn't because they stopped working. It was because industrial agriculture required control, and guineas refused to be controlled. By the 1960s, farming in America was undergoing a radical transformation. Small diversified homesteads were being replaced by large-scale monoculture operations. The goal was no longer sustainability, it was maximization. Maximum output per square foot, maximum eggs per hen, maximum profit per input. Everything had to be measurable, predictable, and scalable. Guineas didn't fit that model. They wouldn't lay eggs in nest boxes. Instead, they hid eggs in tall grass, under bushes, and along fence lines. For a farmer trying to collect and sell eggs commercially, this was unacceptable. You couldn't run a business when you had to search the property every morning, hoping to find hidden nests. Chickens, on the other hand, laid eggs exactly where you wanted them, in clean, accessible boxes, twice a day, like clockwork. Guineas also refused confinement. If you tried to cage them or keep them in a barn, they became stressed, aggressive, and stopped laying altogether. For factory farms that depended on high-density housing to reduce costs, this was a deal-breaker. Chickens tolerated tight quarters. Guineas didn't. So the entire industry shifted toward chickens. Breeding programs focused on creating birds that laid more, ate less, and tolerated confinement. By the 1970s, commercial chicken breeds were producing over 250 eggs per year compared to their natural 60. Guineas, meanwhile, still laid 60 to 80 eggs per season and couldn't be bred to produce more without losing their hardiness. There was another problem: noise. Guineas are loud. Their alarm call, which families once valued as a security feature, became a liability in suburban and semi-rural areas. As housing developments expanded into former farmland, neighbors complained. Zoning laws were updated, livestock ordinances tightened, birds that crowed or called frequently were banned. Chickens could be kept quiet with enclosed coops. Guineas could not.
By the 1980s, most hatcheries stopped carrying guinea chicks. Feed stores stopped stocking educational materials. Extension offices stopped recommending them. An entire generation of farmers grew up never knowing these birds existed outside of history books or elderly relatives' stories. The knowledge didn't just fade, it was actively erased.
Agriculture colleges taught industrial methods. Government subsidies rewarded large-scale chicken operations. Small farms that still raised guineas were seen as backward or inefficient. But here's what didn't change: the reasons guineas worked in the first place. If you have land, if you value self-sufficiency, if you want animals that don't require constant investment or create dependency, guineas still outperform chickens. They still control pests without chemicals. They still produce nutrient-dense protein without expensive feed. They still provide security without technology. The system didn't fail. It was simply replaced by a system that prioritized corporate profit over family resilience. And now, as more people question the sustainability and ethics of industrial food production, guinea fowl are quietly reappearing. Not in factories, but on homesteads, small farms, and properties where independence matters more than convenience. Could you actually raise guinea fowl today? Yes, if you have the right setup. Guineas aren't backyard birds. They need at least half an acre per small flock, ideally more. If you have suburban neighbors or HOA rules, this isn't the bird for you. But if you have rural land, open pasture, or a small homestead, they thrive. Startup investment is minimal. A pair of guinea keets costs $15 to $30 from heritage hatcheries. Compare that to heritage chickens at similar prices. But remember, guineas don't need expensive coops, predator netting, or frequent feed purchases. They forage up to 90% of their diet if your land has insects and seeds. The trade-off is noise. Guineas are loud. Their alarm call can reach 100 decibels. For some families, that's a security feature. For others, it's a deal breaker. They also roam widely, so if you have neighbors close by, the birds may wander onto adjacent property. But if you value natural pest control, sustainable protein, and an independent animal that doesn't require daily management, this is still one of the most resilient systems available. You're not raising a pet. You're restoring a forgotten partnership that worked for generations before industrial farming erased it. If this kind of forgotten knowledge matters to you, give the video a like. It helps YouTube surface this to others who are looking for alternatives to modern industrial systems. And tell me in the comments, had you heard of guinea fowl before, or is this completely new? I'm curious how many people remember these birds from their grandparents' farms. I read every comment. This channel grows through shared knowledge from people who remember what worked. Here's something rarely talked about. Most animal systems failed not because of the animal, but because humans tried to modernize what was meant to stay simple. We took chickens, confined them, altered their breeding, and turned them into production machines. It worked for a while. But now we're dealing with antibiotic resistance, disease outbreaks, and eggs that cost $6 or $7 a dozen. Guinea fowl never needed that system. They stayed wild enough to survive, tame enough to stay home. And that balance between independence and partnership is what made them resilient. This is the pattern you'll see throughout this channel. The animals that disappeared weren't inferior. They were inconvenient for industrial-scale operations. But for families who value self-sufficiency, health, and long-term sustainability, those same animals often outperform modern alternatives. The more natural the system, the more life-changing it becomes. Not because it's romantic, but because it doesn't break under pressure. It doesn't require constant inputs. It doesn't create dependency. That's what our ancestors understood. And that's what we're relearning, one forgotten system at a time. You don't need more animals. You need the right knowledge. If you have land and you value self-sufficient, sustainable food systems, guinea fowl are worth considering, not because they're trendy, because they're forgotten for the wrong reasons. They worked for generations. They still work today. The only thing that changed was the system around them. Pick one idea from today and sit with it. Research heritage hatcheries in your area. Talk to older farmers who remember raising them. Visit a homestead that still keeps a flock. That's how buried systems come back to life. One family at a time, one decision at a time. And if you want more hidden animal knowledge like this, subscribe to the Animal Lost Vault. This channel exists to preserve what worked before industrial farming erased it. New videos every week uncovering the animals, the practices, and the systems that built resilient families for centuries. Thanks for opening the vault with me. I'll see you in the next one.